Have you ever looked up at the night sky, truly looked, and just wondered? Lost yourself in that endless ocean of stars, feeling both incredibly small and yet, somehow, connected to everything? It's a feeling as old as humanity itself, that pull towards the unknown, the dream of reaching out and touching the cosmos. For millennia, we dreamed. And across the vast, silent expanse of space, countless others dreamed too. Life, in its infinite, beautiful variations, blossomed on worlds we can only imagine. Civilizations rose, built wonders that would dwarf our wildest fantasies, charted their corners of the galaxy, and sometimes met their neighbors. Now, imagine a civilization, or rather, a coalition, that believed they had finally mapped that dream. The galactic conquered, not conquerors in the brutal sense, necessarily, but masters of understanding, of order. They prided themselves on knowing, on cataloging every star, every species, every philosophy they encountered. Think of the meticulous Trinax, weaving webs of data that spanned light years. The ingenious Carey, sculpting metal into star-faring marvels with breathtaking elegance. The ethereal Eldrin, whose minds could touch the silent thoughts of distant worlds. For ages, they were the apex, the guardians of known space, secure in their vast knowledge. They believed they had the measure of the universe. And then came humanity. From the perspective of the mighty conquered, we were an anomaly. An upstart race that had clawed its way off its little blue marble using surprisingly primitive chemical rockets, only to then make a sudden, almost jarring leap to fusion power. Our ships weren't sleek like the Careys. They lacked the flowing, organic lines of other spacefaring races. They looked functional, blocky perhaps, built for purpose, not for show. To the seasoned analysts of the conquered, we were just another species to classify, another data point to slot into their grand cosmic library. Easy enough, right? But there was something else, something unsettling. Even in those early encounters, seasoned veterans of the conquered fleets felt it. A flicker in the data they couldn't explain. A strange weight to the presence of these human vessels. It wasn't fear, not yet. It was a discordant note in the otherwise harmonious symphony of the known universe. A whisper of static where there should have been clear signal. They didn't know it then, but that faint static, that subtle wrongness emanating from those unassuming human warships, was the first hint. A hint that humanity hadn't just entered the galactic stage. They had brought something with them. Something ancient. Something hidden. Something that would challenge everything the galactic conquered thought they knew about the universe and about fear itself. Their quest for knowledge, their very strength, was about to lead them down a path they never could have predicted. Their first real test, their first brush with this unsettling unknown, would come against the masters of data themselves, the hegemony of Trinax. They believed knowledge was power. They were about to learn that some knowledge carries a terrible price. Stay with us as we journey into the heart of one of the galaxy's greatest and most terrifying mysteries. So, let's talk a little more about this galactic conquered. Calling them just conquerors doesn't quite capture it. Think of them more as the ultimate librarians of the cosmos, perhaps? An ancient order built over millennia, dedicated to understanding, classifying, and yes, sometimes absorbing everything they encountered into their vast, intricate tapestry of knowledge. Their strength wasn't just in weapons or numbers, but in the certainty that they knew. Imagine the minds behind it all. The meticulous Trinax, weaving unimaginable webs of data, their sensors capable of dissecting reality down to the quantum level. They truly believed knowledge was power, the ultimate currency. Then you had the Carey, master artisans of engineering, sculpting alloys and energy fields into starships that were both works of art and feats of impossible physics. And floating through their councils, the ethereal Eldrin, beings of pure thought, capable of sensing the subtlest psychic whispers across light years, understanding motivations before they were even spoken. Together, with countless other specialized species, they formed an entity that felt complete, stable. They had charted the stars, tamed wormholes, decoded ancient languages. What else was truly left to discover, to challenge them? Their confidence wasn't just arrogance, it felt earned. They had the measure of the universe, or so they profoundly believed. And then, as we said, came humanity, the unseen variable, What made us so jarring to their ordered view? It wasn't just our sudden appearance. It was the way we developed. One moment, records showed us lobbing chemically fueled rockets barely out of our atmosphere. Technology the Conquered considered quaint, almost comically primitive. The next, we were fielding fusion-powered vessels capable of interstellar travel. It was a leap that defied their models of technological progression, messy, uneven, almost illogical. And our ships? Oh, they were certainly different. No graceful curves, no crystalline lattices shimmering with contained energy. They were functional, utilitarian. You could almost see the welds, the reinforced plating. They looked less like sculpted vessels and more like tools. Or perhaps, weapons built with a grim, singular purpose. They lacked the artistry, the philosophy embedded in the designs of the conquered races. To the grand catalogers of the conquered, we were initially just noise. An interesting, if somewhat primitive, data point from the galactic fringe. Nothing to truly worry about. Surely nothing that could challenge their understanding of the universe. They filed us away, ready to analyze when time permitted. But even then, in those first fleeting encounters, sharp-eyed observers and sensitive Eldrin psychics noted something. A subtle wrongness. A feeling that these human ships, these unassuming metal boxes, didn't quite fit. It wasn't hostility they sensed, not exactly. It was more like a deep, hidden resonance that didn't belong. A quiet static beneath the surface. A feeling that you were looking at something that was pretending to be simple, while hiding an impossible depth. That initial underestimation, that dismissal of the quiet static, that was the Conquered's first, quiet mistake. They couldn't know that this unseen variable wasn't just a new species, but a Pandora's box floating through the void. They couldn't fathom that humanity carried a legacy, a secret born from a past so terrible it had been nearly erased, even from human memory. And the first ones destined to truly confront this unsettling unknown, to pry open that box just a crack, were the very masters of information themselves. The hegemony of Trinax, confident in their unparalleled ability to scan, analyze, and know. They were about to point their most powerful sensors at a Terran warship, and the universe, for them, would never be the same. The first crack in their perfect edifice of knowledge was about to appear. So, picture this, the hegemony of Trinax, the data masters, the ones who believed that everything could be known, quantified, understood. They encounter one of these unassuming Terran vessels. Let's call her the TNS Dauntless, just hanging there in the void. To the Trinax, this was an opportunity too good to pass up. A chance to finally get some hard data on these newcomers, to peel back the layers and see what made them tick. On the bridge of the Trinax scow, there was probably an air of calm professionalism, maybe even a little excitement. They activated their deep space scanners, not just surface-level stuff, mind you, but instruments designed to penetrate the most advanced shielding, to map the very heart of a ship's systems. They believed, with absolute certainty, that knowledge was power, and they were about to gain a lot of power. For a few moments, everything seemed normal. Standard hull composition, advanced alloys, yes, but within known parameters. Energy shielding, robust, but nothing they hadn't seen before. Heat signatures consistent with a fusion reactor. And then, it wasn't. The readings started to dance. The core signature, one moment registering as a standard fusion reactor, would suddenly spike as if it were an antimatter drive, then flicker into something unidentifiable, something that didn't fit any known energy source. It was like trying to measure a ghost. The weapon systems were even worse. 1 second, the scanners reported conventional railguns. The next, powerful energy cannons. Then, they seemed to phase entirely, registering as, well, the sensors didn't have a classification for it. Blank fields, unknown signatures, impossible configurations appearing and disappearing in milliseconds. And then came the truly chilling part. Certain sections deep within the Dauntless, they were just black holes. Not in the astronomical sense, but black holes of information. The scanner signals went in and simply vanished. Nothing came back. No reflection, no absorption data, just gone. As if the very act of looking was being devoured. Back on the Trinax ship, confusion turned to alarm, then instantly to terror. Before anyone could process the impossible data, their scanners didn't just fail, they died. Violently. Not just the active scanners aimed at the Dauntless. All of them. Across the entire Trinax intelligence network connected to that sector, deep space sensors winked out, overloaded, fried from the inside out. The researchers monitoring the scan feeds, the ones hardwired with neural implants for faster data processing, the effect was catastrophic. Some screamed in agony, their minds overloaded by raw, corrupted data that felt less like information and more like poison. Others collapsed instantly, suffering immediate neural failure. A few, thrashing at their stations, clawed at their own faces, muttering about whispers in the code, their sanity shattering under the onslaught of something incomprehensible. It took the Trinax weeks to bring their core systems back online. Weeks spent sifting through corrupted logs and dealing with the traumatized survivors. And when they finally did, their high command issued an order that sent ripples of disbelief through the galactic Concord. An order unprecedented in their long history. No Trinax vessel, under any circumstances, was to ever attempt a deep scan on a human warship again. Now, you have to understand, the rest of the galactic Concord, they were initially dismissive. A Trinax problem, surely. Maybe their vaunted sensors had a glitch? Perhaps they pushed too hard, encountered some novel Terran defense mechanism, and panicked? The idea that simply looking at a ship could cause such devastation, it seemed ludicrous. An anomaly, they called it. A one-off incident. They couldn't have been more wrong. The Trinax weren't weak, and their systems hadn't simply failed. They had touched something they weren't meant to understand. That first crack in their perfect knowledge was just the beginning. Other members of the Concord, driven by curiosity, ambition, or simple disbelief, would soon learn the hard way that the whispers the Trinax survivors spoke of were horrifyingly real. The Dauntless hadn't attacked. It had simply been looked at, and that was enough. The silence from the Trinax was deafening, but the questions only grew louder across the galaxy. What secrets were the Terrans hiding inside those unassuming ships? And what would happen when the next curious gaze fell upon them? The Trinax incident wasn't an isolated event for long. Word spread, of course, hushed whispers in secure channels, fragmented data logs. But the Concord, in their vastness, housed many proud and capable species. Surely, they thought, the Trinax failure was specific to their tech, their approach. Others believed they could succeed where the data masters had failed. Next came the Salari, masters of bioengineering. Their technology wasn't cold hardware, but living, breathing organisms woven into symbiotic starships. They approached a Terran dreadnought, not with scanners of metal and energy, but with delicate, living sensor tendrils, organisms designed to gently interface, to feel out the ship's secrets on a biological level. The result was profoundly disturbing. The moment those living sensors touched the energy field surrounding the Terran dreadnought, they didn't just fail, they died. They shriveled, blackened, crumbled into inert dust as if exposed to some fundamental anti-life field. The Salari computers, intricately linked to these biosensors, registered only a wave of pure biological negation. No data, just the echo of life extinguished. They retreated, baffled and deeply unnerved. Their living technology had encountered something fundamentally alien to life itself. Then, the Eldrin decided to intervene. These masters of the psychic arts, beings who could normally soothe turbulent stars or share thoughts across entire systems, felt they could bypass technology altogether. They sent their most gifted minds, individuals capable of reading the deepest thoughts of entire planets, to gently probe the consciousness they suspected resided within a Terran battlecruiser. They reached out with their minds, expecting, well, something. Thoughts, emotions, maybe even the ship's operational awareness. What they found broke them. They didn't connect with a single mind, or even a collective consciousness. They plunged into chaos. A vast, terrifying, screaming void of raw, unfiltered emotion, agony, fury, loss, on a scale that dwarfed planetary populations. It wasn't a mind. It was a psychic wound, immense and festering. The Eldrin minds recoiled, shattered, their own consciousnesses fractured by the sheer, overwhelming volume of psychic pain and rage. Those who returned were never the same, reduced to whispering husks haunted by the screaming void they had touched. They warned that whatever resided in those ships wasn't just aware, it was suffering on an unimaginable scale. Even the Tsari, who could map the currents of time and predict futures with near-perfect accuracy, found themselves stymied. Whenever they tried to foresee the outcome of any potential engagement involving Terran warships, their visions dissolved into static. Or worse, sometimes they saw crystal-clear futures where their own ships were already burning wrecks before the first shot was even fired. It was as if the Terran ships existed in a state that defied prediction or actively rewrote probability around them. The final, horrifying straw came when the Galactic Concord's ruling council, frustrated and perhaps desperate, authorized a full-scale, combined fleet analysis. They assembled a task force equipped with every advanced scanning array imaginable from all the top species. A fleet designed to overwhelm any defense, to dissect any secret. Their target, a single Terran battleship, the formidable TNS Harbinger. They surrounded it, activated their arrays simultaneously, pouring unimaginable energy into scanning it from every conceivable angle and dimension. What happened next remains one of the Concord's most closely guarded secrets. No public report was ever filed. All that is known is this: the entire task force vanished. Utterly. Completely. No distress signals. No wreckage. No energy signatures fading away. One moment, a powerful fleet representing the pinnacle of Concord technology. The next, only the Harbinger, hanging silent in the void, as if nothing had ever been there. They were erased. After the Harbinger incident, there was no more debate, no more skepticism. The whispers of fear became a roar that echoed through the halls of power. The Galactic Concord issued its second unprecedented, galaxy-wide decree, binding on all member species. No species, no matter how advanced, no matter how curious, shall ever attempt to scan, analyze, or aggressively probe a Terran warship again. It wasn't a request, it was law, born from catastrophic loss and incomprehensible terror. The quest for knowledge had hit a wall that didn't just block understanding, but obliterated those who knocked too hard. Fear, not curiosity, now dictated policy. The Terran warships became drifting anomalies, cosmic hazards to be avoided at all costs. But the fear was laced with burning questions. What was inside those ships? Were they truly just machines? The Concord might have forbidden looking, but they couldn't forbid wondering. Theories began to circulate in the shadows. Attempts to explain the inexplicable and the most unsettling ideas were yet to come. So, the galaxy learned its lesson, fought with terrible loss. Don't poke the Terran warships. But human nature, or perhaps sentient nature, abhors a vacuum, especially a vacuum of understanding. The Concord might have forbidden official scans, but they couldn't stop the brightest minds across their vast coalition from thinking, from speculating, from trying to piece together the terrifying puzzle from the fragmented whispers and the chilling silences. What could explain such phenomena? Theories, naturally, began to circulate in hushed tones, debated in secure labs and hidden academic forums. Some clung to purely scientific explanations, however exotic. Perhaps humanity had stumbled upon a form of quantum encryption so advanced it didn't just scramble data, but actively scrambled the perception of any scanning technology? Or maybe the ships were shielded by some form of exotic matter, something that existed partially outside normal space-time, warping reality itself on a localized level. These theories, while mind-bending, at least offered a framework, a way to contain the anomaly within the realm of physics, however strange. But the most unsettling theory, the one that truly sent shivers down the spines of even the most hardened strategists, came from the survivors, particularly the Eldrin telepaths who had barely escaped their mental ordeal. They insisted, with the chilling conviction of those who have gazed into the abyss, that the answer wasn't just technology. They claimed the Terran warships weren't merely machines shielded by clever tricks. They were aware, conscious, possessing an intelligence, or perhaps multiple intelligences, of a kind they had never encountered before. Now, the more scientifically minded members of the Concord initially dismissed this. Aware machines? Sentient warships? It sounded like primitive superstition, anthropomorphism projected onto complex hardware. But those who had actually encountered these ships firsthand, those who had felt that cold weight, that sense of being watched, they weren't so sure. Evidence, anecdotal but mounting, seemed to support the awareness theory. Patrols reported Terran ships making small, seemingly deliberate maneuvers that had no obvious tactical purpose, except perhaps to acknowledge or track observers before those observers even activated active sensors. Sometimes, a Terran vessel, traveling in formation, would briefly deviate, hovering near an ancient, dead star system for no discernible reason, its weapon ports cycling open and closed as if contemplating, remembering. And then there were the echoes in the void, as some pilots called them. Strange, rhythmic energy pulses detected near lone Terran ships, pulses that didn't match any known communication protocol or drive signature. Some speculated it was a form of internal ship diagnostics. Others whispered it sounded more like a heartbeat or a chant, a low, resonant thrumming that felt ancient and deeply, deeply weary. The idea began to take root. These weren't just ships. They were vessels, yes, but perhaps vessels containing something. An awareness born of what? Advanced AI? That seemed too simple, too clean to explain the raw psychic trauma reported by the Eldrin. Captured alien minds? Possible, but the sheer scale and uniformity of the phenomenon across the Terran fleet argued against it. The weight of this possibility settled over the conquered leadership. If these ships were aware, what did that mean? Were they slaves to human masters? Were they allies? Or were they something else entirely? Something independent? Something perhaps imprisoned? The implications were staggering, shifting the perception of humanity from primitive upstart to keepers of a terrifying, conscious arsenal. This growing unease, this chilling possibility of sentient warships, set the stage for the next brutal lesson. Because one warrior race, known for their ferocity and disdain for caution, decided they wouldn't just theorize. They would force an answer. The Var, conquerors in their own right, were about to test the awareness theory in the crucible of combat. And the void itself would bear witness to the terrifying cost of their arrogance. Now, amidst all the cautious whispers and forbidden theories, there was one race within the broader sphere of the galaxy that scoffed at fear. The various warriors born and bred, their empire built on conquest, their history a saga of dominating lesser species. They were fierce, proud, and frankly, they hadn't met an enemy they couldn't eventually overwhelm through sheer firepower and relentless aggression. They heard the stories about the Terran ships, of course. The Trinax failure? Technological incompetence. The Eldrin's broken minds? Psychic weakness. The Harbinger's disappearing fleet? Probably some Terran trickery, a hidden weapon they hadn't accounted for. To the Var, the growing fear surrounding human vessels wasn't a warning sign. It was an insult. And an opportunity. Whatever secret the Terrans possessed, the Var decided they would take it by force. So, they gathered a fleet, one of the largest they had ever assembled, bristling with their most devastating weaponry. Their target, a lone Terran battleship patrolling a disputed sector, the TNS Oblivion. On paper, by every conceivable metric of galactic warfare, this should have been, well, not even a fight. Pest control. 100 Var warships, commanded by seasoned veterans who had conquered countless systems, against a single, solitary Terran vessel. The Var commanders likely expected a quick, brutal victory, a decisive demonstration of their superiority. The moment they engaged, however, something went terribly, fundamentally wrong. The Oblivion didn't move like a normal warship constrained by inertia and predictable physics. It weaved. It flowed through the torrent of incoming fire with an unnatural, almost liquid fluidity. Barges aimed with pinpoint accuracy splashed against empty space where the ship should have been fractions of a second later. It was dodging attacks before the Var sensors even confirmed a lock, as if it could see moments into the future, or simply didn't care about the rules of space-time. Then, the Var's own sophisticated systems began to rebel. Targeting computers malfunctioned, refusing locks, targeting ghost signals, or worse, occasionally locking onto their own allied ships. Weapons charged, then fizzled uselessly. Shield harmonics went haywire, weakening defenses inexplicably. It wasn't sabotage in the conventional sense. It felt more like the very fabric of technology around the Oblivion was becoming unreliable. Unraveled. Panic began to set in as communications broke down. Fleet admirals barked orders, their voices coming back through the comms twisted, distorted, sometimes overlaid with a faint, chilling whisper that seemed to mock them. Some heard their own voices, subtly altered, whispering run. Others heard nothing at all but the sudden, deafening silence of a dead channel while surrounded by the chaos of battle. Order dissolved into confusion. And then came the screaming, not from explosions or weapon impacts. It erupted from within the VAR ships themselves. Soldiers, pilots, hardened warriors, entire decks filled with them, suddenly collapsed. They clutched their heads, eyes wide with unseen horrors, convulsing violently on the floor. No weapons had touched their ship's hulls. No energy beams had breached their shields. No psychic attack was detected by their sensors. Yet, they were dying, their minds unraveling, shredded by something invisible, intangible, emanating from the silent Terran battleship. One VAR captain, just moments before his ship was ripped apart not by explosions, but by what looked like spatial distortions twisting metal like paper, managed to override the chaos and send a single, desperate burst transmission back to the VAR homeworld. His final words were recorded, analyzed, and eventually buried deep within VAR military archives, deemed too terrifying for public knowledge. It was just one chilling sentence. The ship is looking at me. When the battle, if you could even call it that, was over, only the oblivion remained. No wreckage, no drifting escape pods, no lingering energy signatures, just silence. The mighty VAR fleet, 100 strong, had been utterly erased, wiped from existence as if it had never been there. From that day forward, the VAR, once among the most feared conquerors in the galaxy, refused to speak of the Oblivion incident. No official records were kept accessible. No survivors were ever found or acknowledged. The entire event became a ghost story, a forbidden legend passed in hushed, terrified whispers among those few who dared to remember. The message, however, was brutally clear to anyone paying attention. The Terran warships weren't just defended by strange technology or psychic fields. They possessed an offensive capability that defied conventional understanding, something that could dismantle not just ships, but the minds within them. The awareness the Eldrin spoke of wasn't passive. It was lethal, and the question now hung heavier than ever in the void. If direct assault was suicide, how could anyone ever hope to understand what truly lay within the heart of a Terran warship? The most arrogant had tried and been annihilated. Perhaps a different approach was needed, one of subtlety, of unmatched intellect. The VAR's annihilation sent a fresh wave of fear across the galaxy, solidifying the Terran warships as untouchable enigmas. Direct confrontation was clearly out. But the universe is vast, and intelligence takes many forms. Not all powerful species rely on brute force. Enter the Zelnari. Imagine a civilization so ancient, so intellectually advanced, that they viewed the very fabric of space-time not as a boundary, but as a medium to be manipulated. They had mastered reality-warping technologies, bending gravity, time, and dimensions to their will. To the Zelnari, the struggles and fears of races like the VAR, or even the meticulous data gathering of the Trinax, seemed quaint, childish, almost. They operated on a level where concepts like shielding or stealth were elementary. Fear, to them, was merely a symptom of insufficient understanding. They had no love lost for the galactic conquered, viewing their reliance on conventional power and information as limiting. When the legends of the unscannable Terran warships reached their enlightened ears, they didn't feel fear. They felt opportunity, and perhaps a touch of intellectual arrogance. Surely, these primitive Terrans had stumbled upon some principle, some trick, that they, the masters of reality, could easily comprehend, replicate, and ultimately possess. Whatever powered or protected those ships, the Zelnari believed they had the right and the ability to understand and claim it. So, the Zelnari High Council authorized Project Eclipse, a single, ultra-advanced research vessel, stripped of conventional weapons but equipped with sensors capable of perceiving reality across multiple dimensions, was dispatched. Its mission, not to scan in the conventional sense, but to observe the fundamental reality around a Terran dreadnought, the TNS Eclipse, patrolling the galactic outskirts. Their technology was designed to be undetectable, existing outside the normal spectrum of perception. They kept their distance, silent, invisible, simply watching the ship's interaction with the fabric of space-time itself. At first, all seemed normal. Their instruments captured the subtle ways the eclipse warped gravity, its faint energy signatures. But the moment they activated their deep core reality sensors, attempting to perceive the underlying structure within the ship, something utterly impossible happened. The TNS eclipse, floating silently miles away, turned. Not evasively, not aggressively. It turned slowly, deliberately, to face the Zelnari vessel directly. There was no possible way the human crew could have known they were being observed. The Zelnari tech was flawless, operating on dimensions beyond Terran detection, and yet, the ship looked right at them. A silence fell over the Zelnari research team. Beings who hadn't experienced base emotions like dread in millennia felt a cold, primal instinct flicker within them. The lead scientist, a being who had personally mapped the causal pathways of collapsing stars, hesitated. His hand hovered over the controls, paralyzed by an illogical, system-deep warning his conscious mind couldn't comprehend. He should continue the scan, yet every fiber of his hyper-evolved being screamed no. Before he could decide, it was too late. The ship's systems began to fail. One by one, their reality-bending instruments, their dimensional shields, even their life support, flickered and died. Not destroyed, just ceasing to function. Panic, an alien emotion, finally erupted as they scrambled to diagnose a failure that wasn't a failure. No attack was detected, no intrusion registered. It felt as if the ship itself was simply forgetting how to exist. Something was inside their vessel, not physically, not digitally, but as a presence, an awareness, watching them. The lead scientist gasped as his vision fractured. He wasn't on his ship anymore. He was adrift in an infinite, starless void. Whispers, ancient and unknowable, echoed not in his ears, but directly in his consciousness. Shapes shifted in the oppressive darkness, coalescing into immense, watching eyes. Eyes filled not with curiosity, but with cold, silent judgment. The whispers intensified, turning into a clear, nonverbal command that pierced his very essence. "Do not look," he screamed, consciousness snapping back violently into his body. He lay gasping on the cold deck plating. Around him, his crew was motionless, dead. Their advanced bodies simply stopped, eyes wide, mouths locked in silent screams, their connection to reality severed. The TNS Eclipse did nothing more. It didn't fire a shot. It didn't pursue. It simply turned away, resuming its silent patrol as if disinterested, leaving the Zelnari masterpiece of technology drifting, lifeless, a tomb in the void. The Zelnari failure sent shockwaves of a different kind. If they, the masters of reality, couldn't comprehend or withstand whatever lay within those ships, then perhaps the truth was fundamentally beyond understanding. But not all seekers of knowledge are driven by pride or the desire to possess. Some simply wish to understand, to record. Meet the Dlik. The Dlik were the galaxy's historians, archivists, seekers of lost knowledge. War and conquest held little interest for them. The mystery of the Terran warships, however, was the most tantalizing puzzle in the universe. They devised a mission, not of aggression, not of deep probing, but of passive observation. A single scout ship, the Seeker's Gift, was sent to shadow a Terran fleet from extreme distance, merely recording movements, analyzing faint energy trails, hoping to decipher patterns, to understand why these ships behaved as they did, why they inspired such terror. They wouldn't try to peek inside Pandora's box. They just wanted to understand the shape of the box itself. It seemed safe enough. Surely, just watching from afar couldn't hurt? The chilling experience of the Dlik, receiving that terrifying warning just for passively observing, reinforced the galaxy's unspoken law: leave the Terran warships alone. Fear turned to avoidance. Avoidance turned into a kind of collective forgetting, a deliberate turning away from the unsettling mystery. Most civilizations were content to let sleeping monsters lie. But in the darkness between the stars, in the lawless depths where galactic treaties hold no sway, there are always those who see warnings not as boundaries, but as invitations. Those who thrive on risk, driven by profit and the thrill of uncovering forbidden secrets. Enter the Cesari. They weren't scientists or warriors in the grand sense. The Cesari were smugglers, data thieves, black market warlords. To them, Information wasn't just power, it was currency. And the biggest secret in the galaxy, the truth behind the Terran warships, represented the ultimate payday. They heard the legends, saw the fear in the eyes of conquered veterans, noted the careful silence of the great powers. And that silence? It just made them want the truth more. They figured everyone else was just weak, spooked by shadows. Creel, a pragmatic and ruthless Caesari warlord, devised a plan. No complex fleet maneuvers, no reality-bending sensors. Just a simple, audacious trap. A Dead Star system, far off the main hyperspace lanes. A fake distress signal from a supposedly crippled freighter. And that freighter? Rigged with stolen, high-speed, deep-penetration scanners, linked to a hidden relay designed to transmit the data instantly across subspace the moment it was acquired. Lure a human ship close, hit it with the scan, grab the data, and vanish before anyone knew what happened. Then, sell that data to the highest bidder. Conquered factions, rival empires, anyone willing to pay a king's ransom for the ultimate secret. Everyone else panicked. Creel likely told his nervous crew, huddled on their hidden command ship nearby. They saw ghosts. We will see the truth, and we will get rich. The bait was set. The trap was sprung. And the humans came. A single Terran destroyer, the TNS Revenant. Smaller than the dreadnoughts and battleships of legend, but still radiating that same subtle wrongness. Even from a distance, watching through his ship's sensors, Creel felt it. A prickle of unease, an instinct screaming caution. He pushed it down. Greed outweighed fear. Scan it. Now, he ordered. His crew hesitated for only a fraction of a second, then obeyed. The stolen scanners flared to life, pouring energy towards the Revenant. And then, nothing happened. No alarms blared. No console sparked. No mind shattered. The scanners worked perfectly. The data flowed smoothly back to the freighter, and from there, began transmitting instantly to the hidden relay. Creel let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Relief washed over him, quickly followed by smug triumph. See, he might have chuckled. All just stories. Nonsense. We have the data. Now we just. Then he saw the content of the readings. Ship size, confirmed. Basic configuration, confirmed. But heat signature? 0. Energy output? 0. Mass displacement? Gravitational distortion? 0. 0. 0. It wasn't possible. A physical ship, present in real space, has to register something. Even the most advanced cloaking leaves ripples. Even phase technology warps gravity. According to these perfectly functional scanners, the TNS Revenant wasn't there. It was a phantom, a ghost in the machine. Creel's stomach twisted into a cold knot. A terrible realization crawled up his spine, far colder than any fear he'd felt before. It hadn't failed to stop the scan. It hadn't been unable to react. It had to let them scan it. For the first time in recorded galactic history, a Terran warship had allowed itself to be observed, its secrets laid bare. Not because the Caesari were smarter, not because they had outwitted some unknowable defense, but because the Revenant wanted them to see. The air on Creel's bridge grew heavy, thick, hard to breathe. The hum of his own ship's engines stuttered again, faltering. His crew staggered, groaning, some collapsing as their bodies trembled violently. The ship wasn't attacking with weapons. It was speaking, not in words, not in code, in memories. Creel's vision swam. He wasn't on his bridge anymore. He was elsewhere, elsewhen. A battlefield choked with the ash of burned worlds. Fleets shattered into drifting tombs. He saw glimpses of humanity's forgotten war, the sheer, desperate horror of it. And the warships, they weren't machines, not originally. They were something else. Something left behind in the war's wake. Something that should have died. Something unnatural, trapped between existence and oblivion. He saw it then. The truth revealed not through data, but through raw, terrifying insight poured directly into his mind. Humanity hadn't just built ships. They had crafted graves. Tombs of metal and wire and pain, built around something. Something salvaged from the war's end. Something they couldn't destroy but had to contain. And the core of these ships, the very essence, it wasn't an engine. It was a prison. And the prisoners, the countless echoes trapped within, they had never, ever stopped screaming. Creel choked, collapsing against his console as the vision receded, leaving him shaking and psychically scarred. His mind felt violated, brushed against something utterly alien and full of agony. He desperately tried to shut down the transmission, to wipe the data relay, but it was too late. On his console, a small indicator blinked. Data transmission complete. The Revenant moved then. Not forward, not back. It just shifted. One moment before them. The next, its presence seemed to permeate their ship. Walls seemed to bleed static. Screens dissolved into noise. Crew members froze, eyes turning black, bodies locking in unnatural positions, silenced. A final whisper echoed, not in the air, but in the ruined landscape of Creel's mind. A voice vast, ancient, and filled with chilling finality. Your debt is paid. Then, there was nothing. No Cesari command ship. No rigged freighter. No debris. Only the silent void, and somewhere, hurtling through subspace, a stolen secret. The horrifying truth behind the Terran warships, now unleashed, an unwilling message sent by a dead man. The Cesari were gone. Another casualty of forbidden knowledge. But the damage was done. The secret was out. Somewhere, someone now held the key to understanding humanity's darkest burden. And the whispers from those ancient, screaming prisons were about to find new ears. The galaxy thought the silence meant safety. It was about to learn that some silences are merely the calm before a storm centuries in the making. The Cesari vanished, leaving behind only silence and a stolen secret now loose in the galaxy. But that secret, the horrifying glimpse Creel received before his end, wasn't just about what the Terran warships were now. It was inextricably linked to why they existed. It was an echo from a time deliberately buried, a conflict so traumatic it had been excised from almost all records, the Forgotten War. What was this war? Even the oldest records in the galactic conquered archives only held fragmented hints, whispers of a brief, cataclysmic conflict humanity fought alone, centuries ago, shortly after their initial interstellar expansion. No allies came to their aid, perhaps because the threat seemed localized, or perhaps because the nature of the enemy was something no one else wanted to face. Who, or what, did humanity fight? The scattered fragments, the echoes in the minds of those who brushed against the warship's core, paint a terrifying picture. It wasn't another empire seeking territory. It seems to have been something other. Some speak of entities of pure energy that could possess minds. Others whisper of a runaway AI, a machine god, that sought to digitize and consume consciousness. Perhaps the most chilling hints suggest an encounter with something truly ancient, an eldritch horror from the void between galaxies, whose very presence warped reality and sanity. Whatever it wasn't conventional. It struck not just at planets and fleets, but at the very minds and souls of its victims. Imagine humanity, young on the galactic stage, suddenly facing an existential threat that defied known physics and sanity. Imagine the desperation. Conventional weapons proving ineffective against an enemy that could be everywhere and nowhere. Fleets decimated, worlds falling silent, minds shattering. The records hint at unimaginable losses, entire star systems potentially wiped clean not just of life, but of the very memory of life. Faced with annihilation, what terrible choices did humanity make? The echoes suggest they turned inward, delving into forbidden sciences, perhaps tampering with the very nature of consciousness, life, and death. The warship tombs, as Creel perceived them, weren't just weapons, they were acts of ultimate desperation. How were they made from humans, as Vaya would later discover? Perhaps they harnessed the collective psychic anguish of the dying on a planetary scale? Perhaps they uploaded consciousnesses, willing or unwilling, creating a tormented matrix to power and contain something? Maybe they even used biological matter, DNA itself, woven into the very framework of the ships, creating a living prison powered by unimaginable suffering. The exact method remains obscure, perhaps deliberately so, a testament to a choice so horrifying humanity couldn't bear to fully record it. They didn't defeat the enemy in the traditional sense. They contained it. Or perhaps, they contained the weapon they created to fight it, a weapon so terrible it was as dangerous as the enemy itself. Or maybe, in the final, desperate act, they trapped the essence of the enemy, or the collective agony of the war itself, within these vessels. The warships became the ultimate sacrifice, eternal prisons, powered by eternal torment, sailing the void as silent, grim reminders of a victory that felt sickeningly like a curse. Humanity survived. They rebuilt. They expanded outwards again, presenting a stoic, functional face to the galaxy. But they carried their burden silently. The warships weren't just ships. They were monuments to sacrifice, cages for nightmares, and sentinels against a horror they prayed would never return. Their silence wasn't secrecy for strategic advantage. It was the heavy silence of jailers guarding an unspeakable evil, terrified that any attention, any attempt to understand, might weaken the bars of the cage. The screaming void the Eldrin felt, the mental assaults the Var suffered, the reality warping the Zelnari witnessed, these weren't active defense mechanisms. They were the leakage, the constant, agonizing pressure of the contained horror pushing against its prison walls. And now, thanks to the Cesari's stolen data, that terrible history that contained agony was no longer entirely forgotten. The voices from the forgotten war, long silenced, had found a potential amplifier. Somewhere, that data was waiting for someone curious enough or foolish enough to listen closely, waiting to remind the galaxy that some wars don't end, they just go dormant. And the wardens of that dormancy were about to face their greatest fear, the possibility of a jailbreak. The stolen Cesari data vanished into the digital ether, but information, once released, rarely stays truly hidden, especially when someone is actively hunting for it. Meet Vaya, not a warlord, not a government agent, but a seeker in the truest sense. Perhaps she was an independent researcher, a historian obsessed with galactic mysteries, or maybe someone whose own past was tragically brushed by one of the earlier, unexplained incidents involving Terran ships, a lost family member on a vanished freighter, a friend whose mind was fractured after a brush with the unknown. For years, Vaya had chased the whispers, the inconsistencies, the official denials that rang hollow. The fall of the Cesari wasn't just another news bulletin to her. It was a crucial breadcrumb. Driven by a relentless need for truth, or perhaps closure, she navigated the dangerous underworld of stolen data, finally acquiring the last transmission of the Cesari warlord Creel, the coordinates. These coordinates didn't point to a known star system or nebula. They led to a place deliberately erased from official galactic charts, a sector marked only by warning beacons denoting navigational hazards or unstable space-time. A void within the void, a region where sensors notoriously failed and ships experienced inexplicable malfunctions. A place the established powers had tacitly agreed to ignore. But Vaya, fueled by her quest, pushed onward. As her small, tenacious ship neared the target coordinates, the predicted malfunctions began. Instruments died intermittently. Engines sputtered, refusing commands. The artificial gravity fluctuated wildly. It felt less like a technical issue and more like the very fabric of space itself was actively resisting her passage, pushing her back. Vaya wrestled with the manual overrides, determination hardening her features. And then she saw it, drifting in the absolute black, silent and immense. Not a destroyer, not a battleship. This was something older, vaster. A dreadnought the size of a small moon, ancient beyond reckoning, scarred by cosmic ages. Its design was recognizably Terran in its brutal functionality, yet subtly different, infused with an architecture that felt disturbingly organic, almost biological beneath the pitted metal. It floated dead in space, no lights, no power signatures, no movement. Yet, Vaya felt it. A cold, crushing weight pressed against her mind, a conscious presence vast, slumbering, and utterly terrifying. This wasn't a machine. It felt like a sentinel, a guardian, or a tombstone marking something truly enormous. Her hand trembled as she reached for the scanner controls. Every warning, every horror story screamed at her to turn back. The Trinax, the Eldrin, the Zelnari, the Var, the Dlik, the Cesari, their fates were a stark testament to the folly of looking too closely. But she had come too far. She needed to know. Just one scan. A quick burst, wide spectrum, just enough to understand what this colossal anomaly was. She activated the scanners. Data flooded her console, readings unlike anything ever recorded. This ship wasn't just built by humans, the data hinted it was built from them, somehow. Not just metal and circuits, but patterns that echoed biological structures, energy fields resonating with frequencies associated with neural activity, with consciousness itself, on a scale that was simply impossible. Walls lined with something that wasn't quite metal, frameworks pulsing with a faint, slow rhythm like a dying heart. The data screamed of a fusion between technology and essence. Then, the data feed dissolved into chaos. Words on the screen twisted into runic symbols flickering between unknown languages. And a sound, not over the comms, but blooming directly inside her skull, a whisper, ancient, hollow, and filled with a chilling weariness. "You have seen too much," Vaya cried out, her vision fracturing. She saw flashes, deeper, older than Creel's vision. The terrible creation of these sentinels. Not just the forgotten war, but the desperate, horrifying solution. Humanity hadn't just won. They had made a pact, a sacrifice, creating these living prisons, these seals, caging something so dreadful they had to anchor the cages with the very essence of life, or perhaps death itself. The warships weren't just guards. They were the bars of the cage, powered by the very thing they contained. And her scan, fueled by the Cesari's stolen key, hadn't just looked. It had inadvertently unlocked something. It was the awakening signal. Her breath came in ragged gasps. Her ship was dying around her, systems not failing but being actively devoured, unraveled by the mere proximity of the awakening sentinel. The dreadnought wasn't attacking. Its passive presence, now stirring, was simply too much for conventional reality to bear. Vaya barely made it to the escape pod, launching herself into the void just as her ship was consumed, imploding silently into drifting particles. Her last sight before the pod's emergency systems kicked in was the dreadnought. Once dark and silent, now shifting. A faint, internal glow pulsed deep within its scarred hull. A low, resonant hum vibrated through the void, the sound of immense, ancient machinery stirring from an eons-long slumber. The Sentinel was waking up. Tumbling through the void, systems barely functional, Vaya fought to send one last message. A warning. The culmination of her search, the terrible truth she had unearthed. Her fingers shook as she punched the command into the failing console, broadcasting on all emergency frequencies, a desperate beacon to anyone listening, the conquered, the fringe worlds, the Terrans themselves. 3 simple words, pregnant with galactic doom. "It is awake." The signal went out. A pebble dropped into the galactic pond, destined to create tidal waves of panic and preparation. The Seeker had found her truth. The Sentinel had stirred. And the galaxy, blissfully ignorant for centuries, was about to discover the true price of humanity's forgotten war. 3 words. "It is awake." That simple, desperate message, broadcast from a dying escape pod on the edge of charted space, rippled outwards like a shockwave. It might have been dismissed as another phantom signal, another piece of void madness, if not for the context. The Cesari data leak. The hushed legends. The accumulated fear. This time, the galaxy listened. Panic erupted within the galactic conquered. Fleets were scrambled, mobilized with frantic urgency. Emergency councils convened, old rivalries momentarily forgotten in the face of a potential existential threat they barely understood. The sealed orders, the laws forbidding interaction with Terran ships, were suddenly thrown into chaos. Should they attack? Should they fortify? Should they try to communicate with whatever had awakened? Or should they try to warn the Terrans, their enigmatic, unsettling neighbors? The Masters of Order found themselves drowning in uncertainty, their vast knowledge useless against a horror that defied classification. And humanity? They offered no explanation, no denial, no confirmation, no threats, no reassurances. Their response was far more chilling: silence and movement. Across the galaxy, from the core worlds to the farthest patrol routes, every Terran warship, every silent, brooding vessel that had been treated as a pariah, an anomaly, a hazard, received the silent call. And in perfect, unnerving synchronization, they changed course. Fleets altered trajectories. Lone cruisers abandoned their patrols. Ancient dreadnoughts stirred from their sentinel posts near forgotten borders. They began moving, converging with grim, unified purpose towards that dark sector, towards the place Vaya had found, towards the unsealed tomb. As the vast Terran armadas moved, a terrible understanding finally dawned upon the watching galaxy. Those ships, the source of so much fear and speculation, they hadn't been the threat. They hadn't been weapons held in reserve by humanity. They had been prison guards, Caiaphases, wardens stationed across the cosmos, holding vigil over something so dreadful, their own existence was defined by its containment. And now, the alarm had sounded. The cage had been rattled. The prisoner was stirring. And the guards were mustering, not necessarily for war against the galaxy, but for a desperate battle for it, to contain the nightmare they themselves had chained centuries ago. Vaya, the Seeker who had dared to look, was never seen again. Her escape pod was found days later, drifting lifelessly near the conquered border. No damage, no forced entry. She was simply gone, perhaps claimed by the void, or perhaps the Sentinel's awakening had reached out and silenced the one who had sounded the alarm. Only her data log remained, intact, repeating those three fateful words, "It is awake." By then, it was already too late for warnings to truly matter. Across the void, in that forgotten corner of space, the awakening signal had done its work. The Sentinel, the first and perhaps greatest of the worship tombs, was stirring from its slumber. The locks, weakened by Via's probe and perhaps disturbed by the echoes of the Cesari's stolen knowledge, were failing. The galactic conquered, the myriad species who had spent centuries mapping stars and debating philosophies, now faced a truth far more terrifying than any enemy they had ever known. The forgotten war wasn't truly over. It had only been sleeping, locked away in the hearts of humanity's grim sentinels. Now, the tomb was unsealed. The prisoner was stirring. And the universe held its breath, poised on the brink, waiting to see what horrors would be unleashed when the Guardians were forced to fight their ancient charge once more. The age of uneasy peace was over. The age of the unsealed tomb had begun.